Welcome to the Innovation Brief, the podcast where we have real conversations with leaders driving meaningful change across diverse sectors. I'm Gabriela Matic.
And I'm Gabby Hernandez. Each episode, we bring you insights from innovators who are shaping the future through bold ideas, fresh perspectives, and transformative work.
Today, we're joined by someone whose career spans every corner of the globe and sits at the forefront of innovation, AI transformation, and ecosystem design. Our guest is Priscila Chaves. She's the Innovation and Ecosystem Lead at Cargill. Priscilla brings over 18 years of global leadership experience, driving AI transformation and innovation across corporate, startup, and public sectors on all 7 continents. She has held senior positions at IBM and Cargill across Europe, Latin America, and the Asia Pacific, advised governments and multilateral organizations in the Global South on AI governance, and has led cross-sector innovation initiatives worldwide, including groundbreaking climate research during an Antarctic expedition.
Her expertise lies in building innovation systems, enabling AI adoption, and realizing business value across global multi-stakeholder ecosystems, with a proven track record of delivering measurable and sustainable impact while scaling technology responsibly. Currently, Priscilla's research explores how emerging AI technologies are reshaping trust dynamics and human connection, with profound implications for responsible AI governance and organizational design. Her broader academic interests examine the narratives and power structures embedded in the development of artificial intelligence.
So, whether you're an entrepreneur, policymaker, corporate leader, or simply curious about the future of AI and innovation, this conversation will give you a fresh perspective on how technology can be scaled responsibly while strengthening human connection. So let's dive in. Welcome, Priscilla. Thank you for joining us.
Wow. Thank you so much for that intro. I am very humbled and honored to be here with you. I'm actually quite excited about this conversation. I'm looking forward to the next 40 minutes of talk.
Amazing. Thank you. Well, let's start. Could you begin by telling us about your role as Innovation and Ecosystem Lead at Cargill, the work you're doing overall, and what excites you most about leading innovation at a global scale?
Yeah, absolutely. So, first of all, Cargill is one of the largest agricultural and food manufacturing companies in the world. I actually didn't know this. I didn't even recognize the brand Cargill when I started interviewing with for the role, but it's actually embedded in every single part of the food supply chain. So just imagine corporations, organizations that touch every single part of our daily nutritional consumption. Like everything that we eat for breakfast at some point will be or has been touched by a part of Cargill supply chain. The food that we also go to the grocery store, and all the different brands, most of them, depending on where you're sitting, a lot of them will be Cargill's customers. And also, when you go out into the fields, into the countryside, and you see ranches and farms, and you see these vast areas of land that are just growing the grains and growing the food that we need, those in many cases are also at some point touching Cargill supply chain. So within my role, given that the very broad general explanation of what the company is, within my role, I work with R&D, commercial, and operations teams, basically to figure out how is it that we can activate innovation in emerging spaces. Areas like health and nutrition, alternative and sustainable proteins, where the potential of impact is so large, it's massive, but also the path to scale is very complex. And so what we do within the innovation and ecosystems practice is that we try to identify those early signals of change. What is it that is happening around the world, around us? What's happening with our value chain, with the farmers, with consumers, with customers, with policy, regulation, markets, industry, so that we can identify where is it that the next big breakthrough is going to occur. And a big part of my role is really trying to find out how to accelerate going from an idea to value. And value, it's not only measured from a financial economic perspective, right? Like value is value for the planet, value for communities, value for supply chains. Yeah, so very broadly as well, that's basically what I do.
Amazing. And so going from working in major corporations like this, as well as we mentioned before in the intro that you've advised governments in the global south, worked with startups, and even conducted research in Antarctica. So quite a broad range of experience. From all of those experiences, what patterns of innovation leadership do you feel universal, and where have you found that context really shapes the approach?
Yeah, I like to think of innovation as built within a broader system. It's really what we're looking for is systems level impact. And companies like Cargill or governments in the global south or a nascent startup in Eastern Africa, they all share a specific connection to a particular mission, to a particular purpose. And so one of the biggest lessons, perhaps, in working in such a diverse spectrum of environments is that innovation will never be, and it shouldn't be, a one-size-fits-all process. I'm openly against treating innovation as a universal playbook. There's very little that we can say will be applicable in one corner of the world, exactly replicable the same way in the opposite corner of the world. And so context shapes everything. And through your question, like, where is it that I found that context really shapes the approach? Everywhere, in every single innovation opportunity, from how risk is perceived to how decisions are made, even to what value means. If you ask an entrepreneur in rural Uganda what do they perceive as value for their community, the response will be extremely contextual if you compare it to a Silicon Valley entrepreneur in its Series A raise or Series B raise, right? So even though the response will be different, there's always value in innovation. And that value is what we're trying to get to. It's not fair and it's not responsible to innovate for the sake of innovating. We need to innovate for impact. And so what is it that impact will generate? And also, what are the unintended consequences of this impact? In other cases, it's about trust building. It's about navigating legacy systems. In government, it's working around tight regulatory, resource constrained environments. And so how is it that we can unlock that value and impact? It's probably the bigger question for any leader. And then treating innovation as a fixed methodology or as a checklist, it really doesn't resonate. Like, it will never resonate with people that are truly trying their best to change their surroundings, to change the communities that are lying around them. So treat innovation as a living ecosystem, right? It requires constant sensing, iteration, alignment with new realities and the realities to come. The role of leadership in that case is then to create the conditions for innovation to emerge and not to control it. And I think that means knowing when to push, knowing when to listen, and when to get out of the way.
That's amazing. I love the way you think about innovation, and I kind of wholeheartedly agree. Touching on a few things you've just said, but also you mentioned earlier, you talked about how, financial outcomes are only one part of the story, right? Thinking about playbook constantly, what, we are being taught most of the time when it comes to innovation is that that's the number one metric we should be measuring. You touched on, impact on communities, broader impact that innovation can have. But if we think about it on a smaller scale within your teams in Cargill, what other signs do you look for to know that your innovation portfolio is thriving? Is there internally something about how the teams or your teams are learning, adapting, or almost just building a muscle to kind of keep innovating in future?
Yeah, I think we can go very technical and go back to leading and lagging indicators. And I think every company has, or every organization will see their measures of success depending on what their ambitions are. And I think that's something that has been widely covered, and I'm certainly not an expert on that. But what I can say is that the more we start to break out of our shells as organizations and start collaborating, truly collaborating with an ecosystem of partners, we need to also innovate in the ways that we measure that success. What's valuable for me as a company, as a corporation, even within Cargill, what's valuable for a team in Latin America that it's doing animal protein will be very different from a team in mainland China doing perhaps alternative seafood through plant-based proteins, right? So it's truly important to become very creative in the way that we are keeping our teams not only motivated, but also informed in how well or how poorly they're doing in nurturing that muscle of innovation and creativity. One of the indicators that I would look for is that learning velocity. How quickly and deeply are teams learning, or is the ecosystem learning? Because it's not only within the team, as I mentioned, it can be an ecosystem of partners. And it's not only about ideas, it's about the system that they're operating in. Are we uncovering new insights? Are we challenging our assumptions? What are the biases? What are those blind spots that we are resisting to learn? And is that kind of learning strong enough to fuel long-term innovation capacity? So that learning velocity would be one. The second one would be perhaps, and this is an overburdened word, it's almost a buzzword right now, and it's innovation resilience. But think of this as building the capability to adapt to change, not as anticipatory resilience. We're not preparing for chaos, right? Let's just invite chaos in a controlled way within our ways of working. And that's actually how you build resilience. You cannot learn resilience through a LinkedIn course, right? You actually learn resilience by facing chaos and then having to explore different routes, different alternatives. And so whether those are market shifts or regulatory disruptions, technological breakthroughs, competition, having a team that is not only capable of navigating because they have the skills, but also having a portfolio that is resilient enough with short terms, a mix of short terms and long-term wins, the bets that you're doing for innovation, the investments. It's part of this resilient system of innovation that we can create. And perhaps just to finish on that, there has to be, connected to this last one, there has to be portfolio coherence. There has to be a declaration of our ambition of innovation, and how is it that every single decision, whether it's for a prototype project or an experimental effort, how is that connected to that declaration or ambition of innovation? Even if our initiatives are super diverse, even if our portfolio and markets are and consumers and customers are very different from each other, there has to be a clear narrative. Our decisions laddering up to a shared vision, a strategic ambition, is this coherence helping to ensure that our innovation goals are just not scattered activities, but a system with direction and purpose. So yeah, those would be my three top choices.
Yeah, so that perfectly leads into, the next couple of questions in terms of, building that resilience and managing different considerations within an organization, but not just that, within the wider ecosystem. So the first question being, innovation management often requires, as we said, balancing different time horizons or metrics and stakeholders. What practices have you found most effective for helping to keep innovation systems both structured and adaptable?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, I guess. €1 million question. Let's perhaps first define what a healthy innovation system is. And again, context is everything. That can change depending on where is it that you're sitting. From my perspective, a healthy system is one that thrives when you treat it like a living organism and not as a static structure. So think less of a Swiss watch and more of a forest. It's not supposed to be precise, mechanical, tightly controlled, highly predictable. Quite the opposite. It's supposed to be structured, yes, but also dynamic and diverse and constantly evolving. So in my vision of a healthy innovation system, we need to cultivate diversity to allow for the cross-pollination of ideas, to be comfortable with unpredictability. And if we're not comfortable with unpredictability, that's perfectly okay, but we still have to do it, even if we do it in an uncomfortable way. It's often in those messy, unplanned dynamics between technology, people, ideas, competition, and markets where real breakthroughs happen. So in my work, and also looking back, this has been true perhaps in every single stage or cycle in my career. I think of three pillars when thinking of a healthy innovation system. The first pillar is ambition, second pillar is execution, and the third pillar is governance. So maybe that's the controlled part. To go back to your question, maybe the pillars are the frameworks where I feel comfortable enough to then deal with the unpredictable and the uncertainty. And so the structured would come from having clear, deliberate declarations of innovation, as I just said, having visibility of all the different assets that we have, all the tools, all the resources that we have to innovate, having a structured governance process, having frameworks for decision making, having visibility of my portfolio. But then everything outside of that will be highly dynamic, will be highly unpredictable. And so my innovation system, I could measure the health of my innovation system by how easy does it respond to foreign agents that are coming inside of it. Or if it were a forest, think of a bird flying on top of the trees and then dropping a seedling. And this seed is going to be completely foreign to my forest. It's going to react. Every single part, every species within the forest will be threatened by this seed that comes from a far away land, right? And so if my forest completely gets stuck and then we start seeing the surroundings, the area surrounding of where the seed fell to die, then that means that my forest, my system is not resilient enough. But if instead it embraces the seed and it perhaps merges, and yeah, sure, it will have consequences. And those consequences, it's the job of the forest to deal with them as they emerge. And so would I prefer a system that is so tightly controlled and mechanical and predictable that it does not allow for any single deviation? The answer is no. If I were to prefer a system like that, then I would probably do better going and working, I don't know, at NASA, building rockets, like those really do have to be quite predictable. But if I'm working in innovation, the best thing that I can do is just get uncomfortably familiar with the reality that these seeds are going to be thrown at us every single day by many different actors. And it's about how to deal with those uncertainties as they come along. That was a very long answer. Sorry.
No, but it made a lot of sense. I mean, I think what struck me here is obviously I fully understand, and I think I fully agree with needing to just get used to whatever the innovation activities you are doing throws your way. But it also made me think of the entrepreneurs we work with in our day-to-day, Gabby and I, and how early days, like early, let's say, idea stage innovators oftentimes come to us and ask, well, I understand I need to live with, the unexpected and things happening and going wrong. But when do I know when to stop? When do I know whether I'm in the wrong forest or the forest I've grown is not the right forest? And I wonder how that translates to the scale that obviously something somewhat like Cargill is very different to a single entrepreneur. But how do you manage that? How do you decide to not move forward with something and, pause something, sunset something, discourage activity that you maybe intended to follow?
Yeah, that's also a critical question. I think I learned this the hard way, I think, as an entrepreneur and not necessarily in a corporate environment. Because when you're an entrepreneur, it's really difficult to kill your darlings, to kill your projects, and to you've dedicated so much time and you've invested so much in not only from a resource standpoint, but emotionally, you've devoted yourself to your venture, to your project. And so to kill it, basically, it translates as perhaps admitting something about your identity that you're not ready to admit. When in reality, it's driven, or it should be driven, by something much more data oriented, right? Data focused. But that's not how the world works. If leaders made decisions based on data, we wouldn't be in so many problems like the problems that we are right now, right? So clearly we don't make decisions following a data driven approach. We make mostly all of these decisions following a very long strain of values, of beliefs, and also the networks that we operate and socialize with. And so one thing that helped me around that time I've had 3 startups, 2 of them crashed and burned, and like they really burned to ashes. And the first one, when the first incident happened, what helped me the most was to acknowledge through a very painful and lengthy process that I wasn't really as obsessed with solving the problem as I thought I was. I was very obsessed with making my solution work. I was very obsessed with what it would mean for the solution to be able to launch and scale and raise and grow. And then when it failed and I was given the opportunity to continue looking for other types of solutions for that same problem, I wasn't as invested as I thought I was going to be. So the first lesson for me was I am only going to devote myself in this emotional, wholehearted way in things that I'm absurdly obsessed at fixing. And that's how it's been from that point forward. So I think taking that into the corporate experience or working with governments or even working in scientific research, you might have invested hours and all your money, all your savings into a specific solution. But if that's not saving the penguin in Antarctica or, discovering the new sustainable protein that is going to feed billions of people around the planet, then why did you start to begin with, right? Like, how is it that you can devote so much of yourself into something that you're not truly convinced is going to work? So I think on the other side, there are different ways that we can de-risk those investments and we can de-risk those efforts. And clearly, it's about connecting to the world, being constantly bombarded by this ecosystem of signals and trying to connect those dots. The more informed we are, the better decisions we make. So, I mean, there's no bulletproof answer. Unfortunately, in my case, it has been very much driven by, if this fails, will I continue pursuing a solution? If the answer is yes, then I go for it. If the answer is no, then I won't even start.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that will massively resonate. And I found that it's interesting also to slightly reframe, particularly for founders that are early in their journey. And I had one, keeping him anonymous, shout out, he'll know he's who I'm talking about, reaching out over the summer saying, oh, I've basically validated, this thing I've built and realized no one's going to buy it and it's not going to work. So bad news, it's failed. And I was like, that's not bad news. You spent 3 months. That's great news. That was very efficient. And now what do you want to do? Is it this or is there something else you want to work on? So yeah, there's that bit around really being obsessed with something. That's a really, really good point. And oftentimes founders, entrepreneurs want to be entrepreneurs rather than actually solve the particular problem, which is a challenge. But we could talk about that for another 2 hours. But
let's talk about that. No, I love it because it's also, just to add to that point you made, it's so common to see many organizations that are actually their entire purpose of being, like the reason why they exist is to perpetuate a problem. Like, if they fix the problem, they wouldn't exist. So their job is actually to perpetuate it. And we take that as a signal of something that we should be doing as well. But really, if you're an impact entrepreneur and you are actually successful at solving the issue that you got obsessed with, then you better be already thinking about your next challenge, because your job is to make yourself jobless if you are successful.
Absolutely. 100% agree. Another question I was curious to ask you was about innovation pipelines. And you've touched a lot on, there is pressure in a corporate context, but also generally to have results, to drive results short term, no matter what the kind of solution or the innovation is you're working on, while still also, leaving space to keep things longer, let them mature, keep your finger on the pulse for what's coming after. How do you approach designing a pipeline of innovation that does fulfill both of those things?
Yeah, that's such an important question. There's sustaining impact through innovation, or making innovation that it's actually lasting and impactful for people and communities and the world, requires balancing two very different types of thinking. On one hand, think of this as world A, perhaps. World A needs the discipline of a predictable system. It needs something that can consistently deliver measurable value in the near term. And those are the things that have been proven. Those are your no regret moves, the things that have given you enough value for you to then make the informed decision to continue investing in them, because you know those are the safe bets or safe-ish bets. And on the other side, you have and you need to create space for complex. Think of these as world B. These are the areas of emerging innovation, emerging trends, emerging signals that might not necessarily show returns, at least not immediately. They may be massive disruptors, but they're gonna take a while. They are going to take time, but could fundamentally reshape your business. And so I think of these two worlds as dual systems, and actually this is what a complex dynamic looks like as well. The predictable side operationalizes innovation. It generates the structured part. It clarifies the stage gates, the KPIs, the resource allocation models that will make ideas move faster from the point of ideation or conceptualization to the market. And so you build in that world A with confidence. Those are your bets, but those are extremely certain bets. And then doing innovation within that world A will most likely be continuous improvement, high performance innovation, efficiencies with new technologies, but you're not going to create anything groundbreaking. That world has already given you everything that it had to give you from a disruption perspective. That's why you set the stage for the world B. And so world A, while it continues to work, in some cases, it will even fund World B for a little while. And so in World B, you will have the spaces that are somewhat safe from the pressure and the and the very aggressive KPIs and the quarterly targets that you have for World A. Because for World B, you will allow it to become a little bit more fluid, to move at a different pace, because it lives in a very complex dynamic that you really don't know what to expect. And so you have to take steps for new information to emerge. And so while in World A, you can plan for the next 3 to 5 years, in World B, maybe you can plan for the next 6 months. And so you'll gather enough information in those 6 months to then make another set of decisions for the following 6 months, because the path isn't linear. The value isn't always obvious at first. And so if we think about these two systems, let's think that those two worlds and systems are not in conflict. They are not competing with each other. They're actually sustaining each other. The predictable one, World A, will create stability, credibility that will allow you to invest in the complex one, World B. And then World B, the complex system, in turn, will feed your innovation pipeline with the next wave of transformative ideas. And so leadership has to take care of both. That's why I said it's a dual system, a dual type of leadership mindset about knowing when to optimize and when to explore, how to design for governance, culture, incentives that support both systems.
That's a really, really good way of looking at it. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Love how a lot of what we've been talking about today is the complexity and the interconnectedness of, the innovation systems and so on. But going more to a more practical level, what does systems thinking look like in your day-to-day work? And could you maybe share a moment when taking that broader view shifted the direction of a project?
Yeah, for sure. There are so many examples. because that's literally the bulk of our work, to make sure that a very predictable, highly data-oriented 165-year-old organization is keeping up with the times. So I think I really believe systems thinking is at the heart of innovation, especially disruptive innovation, and to constantly zoom out and see the broader dynamics, how the different parts of the business, the market, society is interacting and influencing each other. It's critical, and in practice, it's not just about asking what's the problem or what's our job, or the famous throwing innovation of the job to be done. It's not just getting to the right job to be done. It's actually thinking or asking ourselves, what are the systems that are being impacted by these jobs to be done? And what might be the ripple effects that a solution for each of these jobs to be done might create? If we were to solve for this, who are we solving for? And what new problems are we creating? So that's perhaps the type of that systems thinking allows you to embrace. And I reckon it is overwhelming. It's impossible to fit in a checklist, in a standard operating procedure, all the different considerations that you'll have to do as you're approaching a solution for a very tangible job in the market. And I also recognize not every job will require this level of interconnectedness or in-depth analysis of impacts. But every single disruptive innovation project will. So again, differentiating what innovation is in these two worlds, we were talking about the different dynamics of world A and world B. In world A, we have sufficient information to know what the consequences will be of yet another flavor of this or another dinosaur-shaped chicken nugget, to give an example, But in world B, or in a world of complexity, unpredictability, we really don't know what will happen, what will be the ripple effects or the intended, unintended consequences of using AI for scientific discovery. And so responsible innovation means that you will have a different set of standards, a different set of disciplines and practices if you're approaching innovation for world A or for world B. And so to your specific question of a moment when taking this broader view shifted a direction of a project, we're currently working with our ecosystem of partners in rethinking how is it that people, consumers in general, feel, speak, and act around the concept of precision fermentation. And so we have a lot of data from the scientific technical side to understand what the reality is of the risks, the benefits, the nutritional compositions, the formulations. But we really don't have that much information, or at least it's not structured in nice capsules of insights from what consumers are feeling around precision fermentation. And so we're partnering with an ecosystem right now because we really want to understand the connection of trust when it comes to the sensorial part. What do consumers trust as they take a bite and they taste something, and is the texture coming into play? Is it only taste? Is it the full experience? Also, is trust impacted by nutritional composition? Are there certain ingredients that consumers would trust more versus others? Are there specific technologies that would also matter in that question? And so I think that for disruptive projects like the one that I'm mentioning, or topics like the one that I'm mentioning, which basically means that we could potentially feed the world with proteins that are sustainable and that are easily accessible for everyone, there's a higher standard on responsibility and ethics that you wouldn't necessarily apply to an optimization project on your factory. So that's perhaps the way I see the connection between complexity, interconnectedness, and innovation.
That's amazing. Thank you. And I think we could really sit down here and talk about, systems thinking and innovation management for a very long time. But there's also another part of your work that you kind of just touched on that we would really like to dive into, which is more so in the AI and trust and ethics space. So our first question in relation to that is, you've helped drive AI adoption in at a global level in a multi-stakeholder ecosystems. When introducing AI into these highly, complex systems, what approaches have you seen have helped adapters, navigate both the opportunities as well as the unintended consequences of implementing these new systems?
Yeah, this is a great one because it's so relevant and it's so trendy right now. A lot of the work that I've done, not necessarily within Cargill, because it is a food company, not an AI company, but a lot of my other passions and projects are around that connection of AI with the way we make decisions and the way we trust each other and the way we connect with other humans. And one thing that I tell people, not only talking about AI, but also talking about strategy, is this is the first time that that the conversation about a technological strategy will not start within IT. It will not start within our data departments or our IT CIO offices. They have to begin within the functions. They have to be embedded within the business. And so don't think of this as digital transformation. This is strategic business transformation. And so the conversation begins there. And that's perhaps the first layer of approaching this conversation in a multi-stakeholder ecosystem. The complexity of a business, of an organization, of a country can be reframed, can be resignified through the lens of AI. But it doesn't mean that it has to be completely transformed by AI. So many areas of a business, of a organization, of a community can harness AI for sure, but not everything has to be AI driven. I'm actually quite against thinking of AI for everything. Like if you could just sprinkle AI on top of every single process that you have, because you don't need AI for everything. In some cases, you just need someone who is very curious and good enough with Excel to make something data driven, And so two perhaps ideas around this topic. The first one is AI adoption is more of an evolution process. It's evolutionary in nature. It's not a deployment. It's not in some cases it is, but the truly transformative AI, it's not something that you buy off the shelf and you install it in your systems and now all of a sudden you have this magic happening. It's actually something that has to evolve and it goes along with users and it goes along with data. And AI doesn't do anything unless it's interacting in the world. And I say this extremely, perhaps bluntly, the value of AI is sitting outside of the algorithm. AI, it's not valuable in the algorithm itself. It's valuable outside of it when it's interacting with its socio-technical context. And the second idea is that what has worked very well for many companies or many organizations that are really progressing a lot with AI adoption is understanding not just what AI can do as a technology, but what the system needs. And when I say system, I mean your innovation system, your finance system, your community system. What is it? What is the ambition the problem that you're trying to solve, the challenge that is hurting you the most? And then how is it that a technology like AI can help you accelerate the solution? And this also means that you'll mandatorily have to be in close connection and in close collaboration with different stakeholders so that you can understand risk from their lens, not from your lens, value, control, mapping dependencies, mapping incentives, and the potential consequences of it. So yeah, there's a lot about AI strategy. And again, that could be a topic for a podcast by itself. And it is in 10,000 podcasts I receive on my feed every day. So I'm sure that there's a lot more that can be said. What I will finish on this question basically is to go back to the point of, if it's the same way as innovation, if you're doing innovation for the sake of innovation, it will not have an impact. If you're deploying AI just to say that you've deployed a new chatbot and it's helping no one and it's generating zero value, then don't waste your money and create perhaps a better documented process.
100% agree with that. I love as well, very much leading with AI needs to be part of the strategy. And I read this research, I think maybe this year, which I found really interesting, particularly when it comes to trust in AI, where, that study, which looked at this, was a meta study looking at 90 different experiments, showing that, yes, explaining AI, making people understand what it does help a little bit with trust. But it's by far not the only thing you need in the mix to actually make make it a meaningful addition to whatever it is you're working on. So to your point, all sorts of things around ethics, all sorts of things about accountability, how leadership introduces it. Those are all, almost more important, right? So I really, really love that way you've described that. Maybe touching on a few things you said, I keep thinking, and I've faced this question myself within my very small company, but obviously different in a bigger context. Like you say, there's time and place for using AI in a way that is meaningful. And then in other instances, there isn't. One thing particularly is this whole point around collaboration between people, right, in teams. I'm not sure myself yet, but I feel like there must be possibilities that AI can really reshape that and make people connect more. Although at the moment, the way it's being used is actually opposite, it feels like. What's your take on that?
Yeah, there's a really interesting concept that I've seen it around. It emerged last year, but this year it has really taken on, and it's around AI fluency, which is different to AI literacy. AI literacy, think of it as, or the way that I think of it is, when you're learning a new language and then you go to the class 1 hour every week, and so the teacher asks you to speak in that language, whatever, French, Japanese, and you then are immersed in the language for an hour. But then the rest of your week, you are in your whatever language you're speaking the rest of the week. That's AI literacy. Basically, learning how to use the tool, learning how to use the specific application. But AI fluency is, using this same example, if you pack your bags and you just go to Japan and you start with your backpack, you start hiking across the mountains, you start visiting random villages, you start talking to people with the very basic skills that you have on the language. That's a full immersion. You will be forced to learn how to navigate the different challenges of not knowing a language or not knowing a specific subject as much as you would like to. And so AI literacy is perhaps the equivalent of learning in little drops, in learning in very controlled environments. And AI fluency is allowing yourself to learn how to interact, navigate, and problem solve with AI. And so what I like the most about this AI fluency concept is that it's actually very connected to the way that we build trust as leaders. Because we cannot, again, let's not think of AI as yet another technology that we're going to make available or enable our teams with. It's actually an augmentation tool. It's a platform for agency even. And so how is it that we are going to be responsible leaders and then give our personnel, give our collaborators everything that they need to augment the work that they do, to have their own redefinition of what their roles are. And I really think of trust that way. If we're too scared of how is it that roles are going to change with AI, then maybe we're not really that trusting of our own people. We're not trusting that they will know how to make decisions. We're not trusting that they know better how to do their jobs in a faster or better way, right? But if we allow them to explore these tools, to explore these possibilities, then we are already giving them that signal of trust. And so this concept of fluency, which is definitely not that new, but we can resignify it this year or in these past few months, actually comes from a very good piece of work, a research that was released earlier this year by Dakan and Feller on the framework for AI fluency. And it talks about 4 different components of fluency. The first one is delegation, setting the right intent, right? So knowing exactly why we're using AI, what decisions are we delegating on AI, and where is it that our human oversight will be essential. That's the first one, delegation. The second one is description. It's a critical one. If we cannot clearly articulate the goals that we want through the use of AI, the constraints and the values, then the AI system is going to go all different directions because we've given it 0 description or 0 frameworks for it to operate. The third one is discernment. And this is fantastic because discernment is one of our most natural human skills. And so in this case, we can use discernment as a skill to use trust and to test trust, right? So we must, as leaders, help our teams develop this judgment to assess whether an AI output is good or bad, to criticize it or to judge it from a lens of skepticism, from a lens of acknowledging that it will not always be right, the same way that humans are not always right. And then the fourth one, to finish off with this reference, is diligence. And diligence is about accountability. And what triggers me the most, one of the things that triggers me the most with the AI hype is how easy it is to blame it on the AI, as if it doesn't have a mind of its own. So that's exactly the point, right? We cannot just no conscious, no sentiency. And so how is it that we are blaming it on the AI? There has to be accountability in place every single time that we use it. And so that's what diligence is useful for, because if we deploy AI and if we deploy it responsibly, then we will be on top of every single output. We will be doing audit trails. We will be going through the feedback. We will be asking people how is it that they're feeling with the use of the AI. So that's the diligent part of our leadership, monitoring the impact, updating the systems, being transparent about how decisions are made. And so in my experience, trust actually grows when people feel better equipped, not just by knowing how to use the AI, but also to reason with it. And so this framework of the 4Ds of Dakan and Feller really resonate because it shifts the conversation from can we use it? Can we use AI? To are we using it wisely? Are we ready to own the outcomes of AI?
Oh, I'll need to do some reading up on that. That's fascinating. Thank you for sharing.
Sure. My pleasure.
So as we wrap up, gonna get into some of, some more, ask you if you can help make a one bold prediction. What do you think innovation leadership is going to look like 5 years from now? Or what is a trend that you think that innovation leaders should really be paying attention to right now?
Yeah. I really resist going into the space of predictions, especially with the world changing as it is and systems being as complex as they are. But I do pay close attention to a few signals. So if I'm picking up these signals correctly, then I would say there's a shift right now from that's going from the solo entrepreneur, from the lone wolf hero inventor individual genius to collective intelligence. And so I think we might start seeing less of the the rising star and more of the collective communities coming together, creating the intelligence and the solution that they need to solve for their own issues. And if we are leaders who cannot orchestrate ecosystems, who cannot lead our teams and our ecosystem of partners, then that's probably going to hurt us a lot. Innovation is becoming less about control and more about stewardship. It's about creating those conditions that are needed for emergence, for adaptation, for shared value. And then the second signal that I'm picking up, speaking now of AI specifically for innovation, is that the pace of change, we've all heard it, right? It's unprecedented, it's changing super fast, but it's also that decisions are now being automated, are now being autonomous. And so if there's a way that we can think of the role of leadership to center sense making, to center trust building, ethical framing. So perhaps the role of the leader is not going to be that much of give me the report, show me the dashboard, and I will make the decision. But instead, how can we create the platforms so that these decisions that are basically being made for us, we don't really need to choose between A or B or C, but the right solution is coming in front of us through a screen. Can we trust that decision? Can we trust that autonomy coming from a machine by creating the right values within our platforms, the right, as I said, trust building scenarios, and the right prioritization following the ambitions that are right, not only for the organization, but for the communities around us. And so having leaders that really invest in their own fluency, not just in the technology, but also the fluency in complexity, able to navigate the ambiguity, to navigate data responsibly, to design for long-term resilience, that it's perhaps the second signal that I'm trying to follow up on. And so rather than predicting what innovation leadership will look like in 10 years, let's focus on what it needs to become: more relational, more systemic, and much more attuned to that interplay between human values and technological capabilities.
What an amazing way to wrap up the last proper question. I love that. You've painted a really lovely picture for me. I think imagining a future where we figured some of these big questions out makes me feel optimistic. So Thank you for that.
We need optimism on this day and age.
We do. So Priscilla, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. What's next for you and your team? How can listeners connect with you, learn more about you, support your work? Anything you want to share before we wrap up?
Yeah, I can't think that far ahead. I'll just say this September I'm gonna be around in a few events. I'll be in Vienna. I'll see you hopefully during the Innovation Roundtable workshop. I'll also go back to Vienna for TED AI, so I'll be around if someone's also attending. I'll be at Cambridge University for Cambridge Tech Week, the week of September the 15th. And then the following week, I'll be at the London Future Food Tech Conference talking about AI in food systems, if someone's around too. And just taking advantage of that, our paper is coming out end of September, the research paper that we've been working on around trust. It's called The Trust Paradox: How Companion AI is Rewiring Human Connection and Social Cohesion. I will be posting that on my LinkedIn profile and website, etc., for anyone that is interested in reading how is it that all of these AI girlfriends, boyfriends, and significant others are making us more distant from each other as humans.
Well, I'll definitely be reading that and will help amplify as well. So look forward to that coming out. Thank you, Priscilla.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Priscilla, again, for joining us. It was an incredible conversation, really insightful. And we'll definitely put the link to your profile in the description of the episode. So if you want, please follow Priscilla. And with that, that's a wrap on this episode of the Innovation Brief. So again, thanks to Priscila Chaves for joining us, sharing your perspectives on how innovation can become more resilient, adaptable. It was just a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. I enjoyed it a lot.
Lovely to have you with us. And if you as listeners have enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to the Innovation Brief and leave us a review. It helps other innovation leaders and curious minds discover the show. And we'll be back next time for another inspiring conversation. This has been the Innovation Brief. I'm Gabriela Matic.
And I'm Gabby Hernandez. Thanks for listening.